Yeah, I was born and raised in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I still live there. I was born in 1960 and was one of 8 children raised by my parents. We were really blessed as kids because we had 2 parents, both of whom we always knew loved each other. We had a very secure upbringing, and we were really fortunate to have grown up in that set of circumstances. I went to a Jesuit high school as well as a Jesuit college, Holy Cross, which is where I met my wife, Therese. Went to law school a few years after college. Between college and law school, I served in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps in Philadelphia, working in North Philadelphia in one part of the city, or one part of North Philly at the Jesus School, teaching 5th grade and coaching the 8th grade basketball team. And then I lived that year further up in North Philly at 23rd and Tioga. So I was blessed to have had that opportunity before going to law school, getting a law degree, working in my father's campaigns, both his 1986 and 1990 campaigns, where I learned a lot about politics and campaigns. But then I practiced law in Scranton for 6 years before being elected to the office of Auditor General, to which I was reelected in 2000. Ran for governor of Pennsylvania in 2002, lost in a primary, then ran for state treasurer in 2004, and then eventually ran for the United States Senate, and starting in 2006. So I've been really fortunate to have had the opportunity to serve in 3 public offices: Auditor General, State Treasurer, and United States Senator.
You've spent a lot of time traveling Pennsylvania over the past several years. Why is it important for Pennsylvanians to have a senator who is from Pennsylvania, who lives in the state?
I think it's fundamental to being an effective representative and being able to deliver for your state. You have to know your state. You have to have a sense of the diversity and the strengths and the opportunities that your state presents. And part of that is just living in the state. I think one of the problems with my opponent is he wasn't truthful about living in the state. He was asserting over and over again in 2022, 2023, and 2024 that he lived in Pennsylvania, and he doesn't. He lives in Connecticut, and he should have just been upfront about that. He could have very easily talked about it in a way that was more truthful, that he was going back and forth, and that he had a strong connection to and a long-time residence in Connecticut, voted up there for more than a decade. But he chose not to do that. And in addition to that, not only about where he lives, but I think misled the people of our state about how he grew up. He tried to make the case that he, quote, came from nothing or had nothing or something like that. He had a secure upbringing just like I did. We were both blessed to have grown up the way that we did, and he should just be upfront about that. There's nothing wrong with obviously talking about your background. I just presented some of my background, his service in the military, and his time serving the country, and that's commendable, and that's what he should talk about, not trying to pretend that this is some kind of Abe Lincoln story of growing up with nothing. But I think it's critically important to have a senator who not only lives in the state, but has lived in the state. In my case, for virtually my whole life, other than going away to college in Massachusetts and a little bit of time in Washington in law school. So that's, I think, fundamental, because one of the jobs you have as a United States Senator, I think the main job, is delivering for the people that you represent. And I've delivered over and over again on overarching issues that affect the nation but affect the people of Pennsylvania, like capping the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. That's law now because of my vote and my work. Passing the most significant disability legislation 10 years ago, when I passed that law, the ABLE Act, which allows people to save for a disability just like a family saves for college in a tax-advantaged manner. That was the Associated Press called it the biggest, most significant change in disability law since the Americans with Disabilities Act in the early 1990s. So delivering for the people of our state, delivering for communities, bringing dollars, whether it's infrastructure dollars or dollars through the American Rescue legislation that lifted up communities, invested in families with a robust child tax credit, which lowered child poverty by some 40% across the country. And you can't deliver those wins unless you have a sense of what the people of your state need. And I think I've got a strong track record on delivering for the people of our state because I know the state that I represent, and I've lived in our state my whole life.
You were saying your opponent, Dave McCormick, has spent the past couple decades living in Connecticut. Like in part of Connecticut, it's one of the most densely concentrated areas of wealth in the country. He's made money off offshoring jobs in Pennsylvania, and as president of Bridgewater Associates, one of the country's largest hedge funds, started working there right after the recession. What does it mean for Pennsylvanians to have someone like that's running for office that might have made money investing overseas or off the backs of people who were affected during the Great Recession?
Yeah, when he was the CEO of the largest hedge fund in the world, he increased investments in China by over 100,000%. So he contributed by way of the investment decisions he made. He contributed to the rise of China. He also managed money for China, literally was working for China by managing money for China. And look, there's just no question about it. The rise of China has often been to the detriment of workers in Pennsylvania. China has an unfortunate but inescapable reputation for cheating. In international deals or international practices over and over again, China cheats. And when China cheats, Pennsylvania loses jobs. The rise of China has led to the loss of manufacturing jobs in Pennsylvania and a lot of other states. So this investment that he was leading on behalf of the biggest hedge fund in the world, and this work on behalf of China, was to the detriment of the people of Pennsylvania. And when that happens, I think people should evaluate whether or not that's the kind of person we want representing us in the United States Senate.
Why is it important for Pennsylvanians to vote this year, and what issues should Pennsylvanians be concerned about when they're voting this fall?
Well, I think they're going to be voting on a range of issues, obviously, but I think they're going to be asking some basic questions. Probably the most fundamental question the people of our state will ask is, whose side are you on? Directing that question, of course, to both candidates, to me and to David McCormick. And I'm very comfortable with answering that question. I've been on the side of workers in our state. I've been on the side of the most vulnerable among us. And I can prove that with my voting record. Over and over again, when you have to make a choice between siding with powerful interests like major corporations and multinational corporations and billionaires and extraordinarily wealthy Americans, I have chosen to be on the side of workers and the most vulnerable among us. And unfortunately, I think Mr. McCormick is going to be another vote in a Senate were he to be successful. He'd be another vote for those billionaire tax cuts that we saw in that gross, obscene 2017 tax bill, where the big corporations and the billionaires walked away with most of the revenue from that tax bill. Middle-class families got very little in that tax bill. In fact, the former president was bragging to his wealthy friends in Florida how much he gave them in that tax bill. And Mr. McCormick wants to double down on that tax bill to keep the corporate tax breaks, which, by the way, cost us $2 trillion, jacked up the debt by $2 trillion. He wants to keep those permanent corporate tax breaks in place. I don't. I think they should be rolled back because the same corporations that got this huge gross windfall from that 2017 tax bill are the same corporations that are engaged right now in greedflation, jacking up the prices of food and household items over and over again for years now, ripping families off. And that's why I've taken them on. I've called them out. I've exposed them. They're pretty damn angry about that. And I got news for them. They're going to be angry for a long time because I'm not going away. I'm going to prosecute this case on greedflation. And prosecuting the case doesn't just mean pointing it out and exposing it and bringing it to light. It means passing tough price gouging legislation that will allow the Federal Trade Commission, give it new power, new authority to go after these big companies, investigate them if they're engaged in price gouging, and hold them accountable. Hit them hard with big fines. If they're not engaged in price gouging, they got nothing to worry about. But these same big corporations had got these massive tax breaks starting in 2017, and they got them, a lot of them over 40 years before that. These same corporations are giving these big shareholder buybacks and making wealthy people even wealthier. And they're the same corporations that have exploded the cost, the price of food and the price of household items. We've got to take them on and confront them, hold them accountable, and roll back the big tax breaks. My opponent disagrees with everything I just said. In fact, he attacked me for taking on greedflation. He attacked me for taking on these big corporations. So he's absolving them of any responsibility for these big price hikes. The good news is the people of Pennsylvania know better. They go to the grocery store in Pennsylvania, not Connecticut. They understand price increases. They understand this concept of shrinkflation, taking a product or the contents of a product and shrinking it, but not shrinking the price, ripping people off over and over again. He doesn't seem to understand that. I do, and it's going to be a big issue in this race. And finally, these same billionaires and very wealthy Americans that are mad at me about my attack on them on greedflation and my determination to prosecute the case against them, those same billionaires are in Pennsylvania now supporting, you guessed it, my opponent. They're going to support him in ways that we've never seen in a Senate election. One guy gave him $10 million for a super PAC supporting my opponent. They've already pledged, just last week, pledged to spend $31 million in attack ads against me, those same billionaires. So you've got a group of out-of-state billionaires that are funding a PAC to attack me in support of an out-of-state candidate.
Democrats are picking up on corporate price gouging, whether it's in the House. Congresswoman Susan Wild and other members in Pennsylvania have signed on to legislation about that. Why is this an important issue for Democrats to pick up in Pennsylvania and around the country?
Because I think it's just a simple case of holding corporations accountable. All of us are held accountable every day of our lives. We're governed by rules and laws and customs and traditions. And in the case of these multinational corporations, it's like the Wild West. They got these huge corporate tax breaks, and what did they do with those tax breaks? They pocketed them, and then they jacked up their prices. They were bragging on shareholder calls. We cited examples in our reports. Major corporations bragging on their shareholder calls how much they could increase prices. One of the CEOs said that we deserve this. We should be able to jack up our prices. We deserve this. It's obscene. It's predatory behavior. It's not like their prices are here or their costs are here and their prices are here to offset their costs. No one would begrudge them. If costs go up, you have to increase prices to offset your costs. But they didn't. They exploded those prices way beyond their costs in a way that is the very definition of corporate greed, because they can get away with it, because the federal government doesn't have any authority to go after them. So we have to empower the federal government with new legal authority and resources to go after them, because when you go after a multinational corporation, they're going to hire a huge law firm, and they're going to try to litigate it to death and try to stop the imposition of any accountability. We've got to give the people the power to level the playing field, to make sure that if the next time they're thinking about jacking up the price of their products, that they might think twice, because they might be the subject of a price gouging investigation.
One of the things that a lot of younger people, younger voters may actually attach themselves to is going after junk fees and ticket fees, especially with Ticketmaster in some of your reports. What are your thoughts on the Biden administration going after Ticketmaster, the Department of Justice, going after Ticketmaster, and what actions should there be with industries that tackle on these type of fees?
This is an area where the Federal Trade Commission has tried to move the ball forward by using its existing authority to investigate some abuses. I think it's fairly broad-based, so when you think about more broadly junk fees, it's across the board. It's concert tickets, it's hidden fees in hotel bills that the upfront cost looks good, and then you look at the fine print, you're paying a lot more. It's ATM fees at banks. Why the hell should it cost in the United States of America $5 to take money out of an ATM machine? It's almost $5, about $4.50, $4.75 is the average. Why should it cost that much to take money out of a bank? ATM fee, it's your money. I wouldn't, no one would begrudge them if they were charging some kind of 50-cent fee, but why should it cost that much money that is particularly pernicious and predatory when it comes to low-income families that are taking cash out to feed their family or to pay for their expenses? Why should we have these junk fees in not just cable bills, but for rental cars and for hotel bills and ATM fees and concert tickets and the like? Example after example of the same kind of corporate greed that we're talking about more broadly with the cost of food and groceries and household items. I think the same dynamic plays out with gas prices. Why do we have to accept the oil companies' corporate greed when it comes to gas prices? What we should do when the oil companies jack up the cost of gasoline to make big record profits, we should go after big oil and tax their excess profits. This idea has been around a long time, but Republicans have always blocked it. Tax the oil companies' excess profits and return that money in a rebate directly to families. Now you'd have to talk about what income levels and how big a segment of the middle class or lower income families you'd make it. But there's an easy way to push back against these big oil companies. So this is all the same thing. It's corporate greed where they think they can get away with it until there's action against them, until someone is pursuing them and holding them accountable. I'm going to do that.
Given the news that he's just been convicted of some crimes up in New York City, how dangerous is it that former President Donald Trump's on the ballot this year? What does this mean for people's rights being on the ballot in 2024?
Look, I would not want the leader of my party to be talking about seeking public office and seeking another term in office to bring about some kind of revenge. That is not what I think the American people expect of a leader. And I would hope that more Republican elected officials and candidates would be honest about their support for that candidate and tell us why substantively, why in terms of issues that matter to people, whether it's lower costs or providing more health care at lower costs or investing in families that need quality, affordable child care, why we should vote for their candidate. And unfortunately, they can't do that because over and over again, what you're seeing on the Republican side is not just a candidate who, if elected again, would be a threat to democracy and a threat to basic rights, whether it's women's rights, which he's already undermined badly, the voting rights itself, which we have a lot more work to do, and Republicans are blocking all the major voting rights legislation. But thirdly, also a threat to workers' rights. So that candidate is not just a threat to our democracy and basic rights, but with a MAGA majority in the United States Senate, which is what would happen. If he were elected, there's no question it would be a Republican majority in the Senate. And the reason I call it the MAGA majority is because it would be the first MAGA majority. It wouldn't be a traditional Republican majority. It would be a majority that was completely under the thumb of that presidential candidate. And I think you saw it on display just in the last couple of weeks where, at his request, they blocked a bipartisan tough border security bill. And just within the last couple of days, almost every Republican in the United States Senate voted against a bill that would ensure that women had the right to use contraception in America in 2024. So that's the kind of majority, that's the kind of extreme MAGA majority that would be in charge of the Senate, along with that Republican president.
Can you explain the significance of the bipartisan infrastructure law here in Pennsylvania and how it's helping the state? And if there's one project funded by the infrastructure law you would have to pick here in Pennsylvania, it's been the most impactful, what would that be in your opinion?
There's no way I can pick one. I think the value of this infrastructure bill is almost incalculable. I mean, certainly you can add up the dollars and attach a dollar amount. I believe last count for roads and bridges alone, more than $13 billion for the state. But that doesn't include other investments in water systems that you probably can't calculate the value of that. How do you put a price tag on cleaner water? How do you put a price tag on investments in wastewater or sewer systems that have been a mess for years? How do you put a price tag on high-speed internet for kids in our schools so they can do their homework? So literally, as I've said often, kids can learn more now and earn more later. It's not just a nice rhyme, it is literally true. If they learn enough when they're very young, they can earn a lot more when they're in the workforce. So there's no way you can put a value on that, bringing high-speed internet, not just to a city like Philadelphia and to neighborhoods that don't have it, but to rural areas, vast expanses of our state where you don't have any high-speed internet at all. And I've driven through this state, or have been driven, in places where there hasn't been much connectivity. So that means kids can't do their homework. It means farmers cannot operate a farm. Small businesses can't operate. High-speed internet might not be quite as important as electricity, but it's pretty damn close. You can't really operate without it. And that's almost incalculable. And the good news is these benefits and these investments are spread across the length and breadth of our state, all 67 counties. In fact, on our Senate website, you can go to a map function, and you can go county by county and find out how many investments were made in that particular county. I was just talking to a radio reporter today in Beaver County, and in that county alone, it's more than 20 investments, I think 25 or 26 we could point to. In a very small county, small population county like Fulton County, only about 14,000 people. In the 2020 election, it was the #1 Republican county by percent of the vote. In that county, there's an investment for high-speed internet of $7.5 million, a huge allocation of dollars for high-speed internet in a small rural county where the children need it, the small businesses need it, the economy of that community needs it. So I'm proud of a lot of these investments that I've brought home, but I think when you can change the life of a community, or even change the trajectory of a child's life because you invested in high-speed internet, because you made a greater investment in the child tax credit, so those children have enough to eat and their families have some economic stability they wouldn't have otherwise. That's about as good as it gets.
What do you have to say to younger voters who may feel disaffected or disillusioned about voting this year? And how do you stress to them, Gen Z, millennials, the importance of voting?
Well, I'd say two things. Number one is I think it's important for people my age not to lecture to young voters, because the last time I checked, they have been driving most of the change in America. Young voters, young people across our country, are the reason why we could pass any significant common sense legislation that dealt with gun violence. Now, we haven't passed what we all want to pass, which is a comprehensive background check legislation and so many other pieces of common sense gun legislation. But the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act of 2022 simply could not have happened without the intervention and the activism and the passion of young people. Just wouldn't have happened. And that played out over at least a decade, where young people were demanding action. And we finally had a breakthrough where we got Republicans to vote for a bill that would provide a background check for 18, 19, and 20-year-olds before they turn 21. And likely, if it were in place, this is my view of it, would have stopped the killer in Uvalde, Texas, who massacred all those children, because he would not have passed that background check that is now denying a firearm to 18, 19, and 20-year-olds who have a criminal background or show a propensity to violence, and they can be denied a weapon. So that legislation only passed because of young people. We would not have made the investments we made in the tax credits that are helping us push back against climate change, to have a 40% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030, 40 by 30. That would not have happened without young people. Young people are driving change on so many fronts, whether it's healthcare or in the economy. And they will, I think, have the same kind of impact on this 2024 election. I think young people are going to vote in big numbers. They're going to vote with gusto, because they know what's at stake. They know what's at stake on women's rights, on voting rights, on climate change, on student debt, which the president brought relief to at least 5 million Americans are paying less student debt because of his work and support by Democrats like me. So I think young people are going to lead the charge again, not just to victory in 2024, but for a lot of change that comes after that.
If there's one issue or accomplishment President Biden and the Democrats may not have been paying too much attention to or out there promoting, what do you think that issue would be? Something that's been flying under the radar.
Well, it's hard to say, because there are so many of them. When you consider the investments I talked about earlier in infrastructure, the ability to change the trajectory of costs over time for prescription drugs that seniors are paying now, by way of passing the Medicare price negotiation and the cap on insulin and the cap on out-of-pocket costs. So it's a long list, but I think when it comes to the future of the country, I think a combination of actions taken to lift up children might be among the most underestimated. The president and our party came together and said, we're going to make an investment in children in the child tax credit, and we proved with that investment that you could reduce child poverty a lot, by 40% in literally a matter of months in 2021, between passage of the bill in March and checks going in people's bank accounts in July, just a few months later. So I think we've proven that if you invest in families to lift up children, you can change the lives of those children. And when you add to that investments in education, K through 12 education, investments in communities across our state. I mentioned a small county like Fulton County, they got $4 million for 3 school districts, federal money they've never seen before, whether it's in a big city like Philly, $1.7 billion for the schools here in Philly, but every county in the state had schools that were affected. So those investments in schools and high-speed internet, in the child tax credit, investments in childcare, I think are helping to change the lives of children. And that might be one of the most underestimated investments we've made.
President Biden gave you the nickname Bobby Casey. How's the reception been to that? And what's your thoughts on just getting a shout out with greedflation during the State of the Union?
Whenever the president mentions a bill that you're the lead sponsor on, that is a nice moment. But I think it spoke to where people are. People are very concerned about these corporate abuses. They're very concerned, as I mentioned earlier, about corporate price gouging and corporations with impunity jacking up prices while they're getting huge record profits and benefiting from huge corporate tax breaks. So I think the president was speaking directly to families who are struggling to make ends meet, and joining me in the fight to expose these companies, go after them, and pass price gouging legislation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.